What's going on, everybody? Kalipa's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a comparison between the Motorola Moto G Pure and the Cricket Icon 3. Now, before we go any further, I do want to remind you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It helps out the channel a lot. And if you want to learn more about either of these phones, be sure to check out my full reviews and tips and tricks videos for them on the channel. But with that being said, let's get started. So the Motorola Moto G Pure has a 6.5-inch IPS LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 270, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. So pretty standard issue display here for an entry-level phone. I want to say the majority of them, especially in this price range, have the exact same specs, so nothing really unique here. But at the same time, it's also not bad, because at 6.5 inches, we're definitely getting a decently large display for content consumption and a nice tall form factor as well. Up close, even though it's only 720p, the display actually still gives us a decently sharp and crisp image, and the colors look nice and bright. Now the Cricket Icon 3 is getting a 6.5-inch LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 268, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. So in pretty much every way, these displays are basically the same. Same size, same resolution, all of that. Now you've probably noticed the Cricket Icon 3 looks a little bit bigger in general, and that's because the bezels are a lot thicker. As you can see here, the bottom bezel especially is a lot bigger on the Cricket Icon 3 than that of the Moto G Pure. I have the brightness set to 100% for both of these phones, and it does look like the Moto G Pure is quite a bit brighter, so keep that in mind as well. I do think overall, even though the Cricket Icon 3 doesn't really look bad, the Moto G Pure does have a nicer looking display. So if you're going to be doing lots of content consumption, whether you're streaming videos, viewing photos, playing games, even reading, the Moto G Pure might be a little bit better for this because the image overall is a little bit higher quality. Now both of these phones are getting 32 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD card expansion as well. I would personally like to see a little bit more. In 2022, with apps in the system and pretty much everything getting larger and larger as time goes on, 32 gigabytes really isn't a whole lot. And even for the average user, you're probably going to fill up that space pretty quickly. So they could definitely do better on the storage, but at least we get microSD card expansion. So if you do run out of space on the phone, you can always offload some stuff with the microSD card. Now, neither of these phones have wireless charging, not very surprising, just wanted to point that out. So if that is a feature that you're looking for, you're probably going to want to look at a different device. For security features, both of these phones do have fingerprint scanners in the same spot right back here on the rear. But the difference here is that the Moto G Pure has Face Unlock and the Cricket Icon 3 doesn't. So if you do want Face Unlock as well, the Moto G Pure of course is going to have an advantage. But if you're fine with just using the fingerprint scanner, either of these phones will be okay. So we're going to go ahead and give these fingerprint scanners a test and see how well they work, starting with the Moto G Pure. There we go, one more time. And there we go. As you can see, this fingerprint scanner is real fast and responsive, no issues here. Moving on to the Cricket Icon 3. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, both of these phones have really fast and responsive fingerprint scanners. So if you're looking for a convenient way to unlock your phone without putting in a PIN, either of these will be a good choice. But with that being said, once again, if you do want Face Unlock as well, the Moto G Pure is going to have an advantage here because it actually does have Face Unlock, whereas the Cricket Icon 3 doesn't. Face Unlock is definitely a nice thing to have, I will say that, because there are some situations where your fingerprint scanner might not work out too well. Maybe your hand's wet, you're wearing a glove, something like that. It's just nice to know that you have multiple options to unlock your phone. It's not the end of the world if it doesn't have Face Unlock. But since the Moto G Pure does, and the Cricket Icon 3 doesn't, the Moto G Pure definitely has an advantage as far as security goes. Now taking a look at the rear camera setup here, the Moto G Pure has a dual camera with a 13 megapixel main camera and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. For video, this phone can shoot in up to 1080p in the rear and front cameras, so nothing extravagant. It is an entry-level phone, so make of that what you will. To give you an idea of what this camera can do, this is a photo taken with the main camera, and for what it is, I do think this phone did a pretty good job. The details look really nice and surprisingly professional. The lighting looks good. The only real complaint I have about it is the colors look a little bit dull. Overall, I will say if you're constantly taking photos, whether it's for social media or maybe something more professional, then you might want to consider looking at a phone that's a step up from this, that has a slightly better camera setup. But if you're just snapping a few photos every now and then, the Moto G Pure is going to be perfectly fine for that. Now with the Cricut Icon 3, we're only getting a single camera here, and this camera is 8 megapixels. Keep in mind that with this phone, since there's no depth sensing camera, you're not going to be able to use portrait mode, and since portrait mode is so popular with stuff like Instagram, if your primary purpose for taking photos is going to be for social media, I would say the Moto G Pure is going to have an advantage here because it does have a depth sensing camera, which means you can use portrait mode, whereas you can't with the Cricut Icon 3. Now for video, it's the same thing. The Cricut Icon 3 can shoot in up to 1080p in both the rear and front cameras. Nothing out of the ordinary there. And this is a photo taken with the rear camera. Now in contrast to the photo taken by the Moto G Pure, this photo is definitely quite a bit more dull. I would say it's an acceptable photo, but I wouldn't really use this phone to take photos for social media because while they're going to be okay to send to friends and family, stuff like that, maybe Snapchat where the quality doesn't matter a whole lot. If you want to get some real aesthetic photos that look really nice, that you're going to be posting on social media or something like that, you can definitely do better. And for that purpose, the Moto G Pure is definitely going to do a better job overall. Now internally, the Moto G Pure is getting 3 gigabytes of RAM with the MediaTek Helio G25 processor. I ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on the phone, and it came back with a single core score of 133 and a multi-core score of 497. The Cricut Icon 3 is also getting 3 gigabytes of RAM with the MediaTek Helio A20 processor. I ran the Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone as well, and it came back with a single core score of 148 and a multi-core score of 505. So these are real comparable numbers here. Even though the Cricut Icon 3 is technically a little bit faster according to this test, it's really not going to make a difference when it's this close. So just keep in mind that both of these phones are really going to be meant for the more basic activities, like sending text messages, making calls, browsing the web, and some light social media use. You can definitely stream videos and listen to music with these phones as well, but if you're getting into more high-end activities like mobile gaming, or maybe video editing or something like that, these phones are definitely going to struggle quite a bit because these processors really aren't very powerful. Now, I would personally recommend running a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on your current device and comparing it to these, and that way you'll get a better idea of whether or not either of these phones will be an upgrade for you. Now for battery, the Moto G Pure has a 4000 mAh battery that supports 10 watt fast charging. The Cricut Icon 3 on the other hand has a 3500 mAh battery that doesn't support fast charging. So there's not a huge difference here. 3500 versus 4000. I wouldn't say these batteries are necessarily super small, but I definitely wouldn't say they're big either. I would consider 4500 to 5000 milliamp hours to be a larger battery. These are pretty average. But with that being said, the Moto G Pure definitely does have a noticeably larger battery, and it supports fast charging, and that's going to allow your phone to charge up quite a bit faster. It sounds like it might not make a difference, and for some people it really might not. If you're always around your charger and you never even unplug your phone, of course you're never going to notice, but I can tell you from experience, when you're in a pinch and your phone is dying, fast charging really does make a difference, so the Moto G Pure definitely has a significant advantage here. On the other hand, with the Cricut Icon 3, although I'm not too impressed by the battery size here, I will say this phone does last a little bit longer than you might expect. Now, as far as extra features go, neither of these phones really have a whole lot. They don't have NFC, so if you want to use Google Pay, you're probably going to want to look at a different device entirely because neither of these phones can use that feature. But I will say I'm a huge fan of Motorola's gesture features. There's so much more on this phone that you can do to customize the controls and stuff like that. Whereas with the Cricut Icon 3, the OS is okay, but I personally just like Motorola's skin a lot better. For example, one feature the Moto G Pure has that the Cricut Icon 3 doesn't is what's called the 3-finger screenshot. Basically, all you need to do to take a screenshot with this phone is put 3 fingers on your screen, and it's going to take a screenshot for you. Then there's some more silly stuff like the fast flashlight, and really just convenience kind of things. But the bottom line is, even though the difference in performance isn't really huge, the Moto G Pure has quite a few more features than the Cricut Icon 3. But in conclusion, which of these devices is better? Now these phones are really similar, and in a lot of ways, if not most, the features are almost identical. But But with that being said, I personally feel like the Moto G Pure is going to be a better device in general. The first reason for this is the display looks so much better. Both of the phones are at 100% brightness right now, and still the Moto G Pure looks a lot brighter, the colors look better, and the image is just sharper. In addition to this, the Moto G Pure not only has a better quality camera, but it can also use portrait mode, whereas the Icon 3 that doesn't have a depth sensor can't use portrait mode and the camera just isn't as good. The battery on the Moto G Pure is slightly bigger and it supports fast charging, whereas the Icon 3 doesn't. And overall, I like the skin of the Moto G Pure a little bit better. You can do things like the 3-finger screenshot, flashlight shortcuts, all kinds of stuff that the Cricket Icon 3 just can't do. Now, one area the Cricket Icon 3 does have a little bit of an advantage is in the processor. It is a tiny bit faster than the Moto G Pure, I will give it that. But it's really not by much. In fact, the difference is so small that I really wouldn't consider it an advantage. And another thing I almost forgot to mention is the Moto G Pure has Face Unlock and the Cricket Icon 3 doesn't. Now, I personally don't really care about Face Unlock when there's a fingerprint scanner, so if I were choosing, I wouldn't even think about this factor, but I know there are some people out there who really like Face Unlock, so if you are one of those people, definitely keep this in mind. But in general, I would say the Moto G Pure is going to be the better device here. But the Cricket Icon 3 isn't a bad phone either, so at the end of the day, it's really going to depend on your preferences and what kind of deals you can get. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you found this information useful as well. If you did, don't forget to leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And again, if you want to learn more about either of these phones, be sure to check out my full reviews and tips and tricks guides for them as well. But that's it for this video. As always, I will see you in the next one.